Hello, and thanks for watching this video, this presentation. I'm Andrew Ivan Brown, and I'm a research fellow at the Center for Biomedicine, Self and Society at the University of Edinburgh in the College of Medicine and Veterinary Medicine. And today I'll be talking about the Polish School of Medicine, which was housed in the University of Edinburgh during World War II. And you'll have to excuse me, my voice is a bit shot after a week of talking last week, but that should be fine. So to begin, my family members, my Jajo Stan Donagevich, my babcia Danuta Nijelska, and my great aunt, or Ciocia Miecia Nijelska. Those are the Polish terms for grandpa and grandma and great aunt. These family members were all students at the Polish School of Medicine. And here's a photo of them. This is actually taken way after they were students in the 1950s. They couldn't have worn very fancy dresses like they're wearing in this picture. They were in the USA in this picture. I'll return to that point about the cost of clothing a bit later. So the major theme I want to talk about today is the question of why students join the Polish School of Medicine. And I've separated this theme into three different categories. So you have here the continue to study medicine after disruption category, and I'll talk more about these themes as they come up in the talk. The second theme is desire to start studying medicine category, and then the third theme is the ordered to study medicine category by the military, by the Polish military. So to begin, I'm going to start with a kind of a brief overview of the Polish School of Medicine, like what was it about, and then I'll talk about the student experiences of my family members. And by telling their stories, I'm hoping you'll get a better understanding of the various life paths that students took to get to this school, both in terms of how they ended up arriving at the school and also where they ended up afterwards. And of course, there's so many stories that can be told about students at the Polish School of Medicine and about the school itself, and you might have heard stories about the Polish School of Medicine or other student stories, and they might be very different than the stories I'll be telling today. While I did draw on a range of sources and did some archival research myself and consulted with family members, I also want to give a special shout out to these two sources in particular. One is a book written by Alicia Bauber, who is a student at the Polish School of Medicine. She published this book in 2013 in Polish. The other is a PhD thesis from University of Edinburgh history student, Adam Palazza, which I consider a very authoritative source. It's remarkably well researched. Okay, so to begin, the Polish School of Medicine existed from 1941 and 1949. It was in the University of Edinburgh. The images you see here is a ticket for the inauguration event at McEwen Hall in 1941. Sorry, my face is covering it. I don't think I can get rid of my face here, but and then the top photos, you have the logos for the Polish School of Medicine. And the school catered to displaced people from Poland, so people who were displaced from the war, who ended up in the UK. It was a distinct school from the Edinburgh Medical School. Obviously, there were a lot of overlaps. For example, it used a lot of the same classrooms and spaces as the normal University of Edinburgh Medical School, but it also had some of its own spaces for exclusive use as well. And notably, it had its own Polish professors, its own Polish students, its own medical curriculum. And the first 2 years of study were actually taught in the Polish language. And then the third, fourth, and fifth year of study would be taught in English. So these Polish medical students not only had to study medicine in their first 2 years, they also had to study English because they had to be fluent in English by their third year of study. And the medical degrees that were granted were British medical degrees. Now, this is a very unusual setup. There were probably lots of professors and students who fled from Europe during World War II and ended up at universities in the USA or the UK or other places. But usually they would be integrated within existing departments. But this was not the case with the Polish School of Medicine. this medical school was set up to be distinct from the Edinburgh Medical School. So you had these Polish professors just arriving in the UK, now having pretty much complete control over this medical school. It was an autonomous faculty. So in terms of like admitting students, grading, curricular design, exams, and even the decision to confer a British medical degree to any given student was largely based on the decision of these Polish professors. So to my knowledge, there's only two precedents to this kind of school, one being the School of Exile at the New School in New York, which was developed for Jewish professors who were fleeing from Europe during and before World War II, to have control over their department there. And another being the Frankfurt School, which originally was in Frankfurt, but then had to be moved to Los Angeles because, for the same reasons. The Polish School of Medicine was widely influential, and it actually inspired several copycat schools to pop up during and after the war. Three of these are in Edinburgh, so the Polish School of Veterinary Medicine. The Polish School of Pedagogy was here at the University of Edinburgh as well. And the teaching department, the Paderewski Memorial Hospital, so that was like a Polish hospital with Polish staff and Polish patients. Polish people from all over the UK would come to this hospital because they'd be able to interact with Polish doctors and so on. That hospital actually, it's where Western General was. It existed for actually quite a lot longer, I think, than just those 2 years listed on the slide, but the teaching department existed from 1945 to 1947, and that was also distinct from the Polish School of Medicine. So why was the Polish School of Medicine created? There were at least three main rationales. So first, there was a large number of medical refugees who had arrived in Britain. Someone actually emailed me recently about her grandfather, Dr. William Hood, who was awarded a medal for his role in helping to evacuate the Warsaw Medical School to Edinburgh. That's one of the biggest examples, but there was other medical schools and hospitals and universities that were also evacuated throughout the country when the Germans and the Soviets invaded Poland. So you had all these Polish students now in the UK who had their medical studies disrupted, many of them in Edinburgh. And so by creating the Polish School of Medicine, these students could continue their studies and finish their degrees. And approximately 185 of the Polish medical school students have a backstory like this, that is, having their medical studies disrupted somewhere in Poland and coming to Edinburgh, either as a part of an organized evacuation or through other means, and then being able to then continue studying medicine, finish their degrees. Now you'll notice that's about half the students. The other half have a different backstory. And those are the kind of backstories I'm actually going to be focusing more on for this talk, and it's related to my family members as well. The second main rationale for the creation of the school was to train doctors for the Polish army to help with the war effort. And the third reason to train doctors to train doctors who could return to Poland after the war ended to help rebuild, hospitals and the medical schools and universities, because many of these had been destroyed by the Soviets or Germans. Now, this family is mainly for my family to see. Sorry, did I say this slide is mainly for my family to see? Millions of Poles were displaced from Poland during World War II, and 300,000 ended up in Britain. Of those, 406 ended up at the Polish School of Medicine. So just let that sink in. Like, what are the chances that of all these displaced Polish people, our three family members just happened to get into this prestigious University of Edinburgh Medical School, study medicine, or University of Edinburgh Polish School of Medicine, study medicine and make a life for themselves? It's so incredibly lucky, but in the broader context of being so incredibly unlucky, having to flee from their homelands, their families, go through all these traumatic experiences. But in terms of being one of these millions of Poles who were displaced, getting into the University of Edinburgh was like winning the lottery. I mean, it's quite startling, especially given none of them had any background in medicine, my family members. As one of their classmates stated about getting into the Polish School of Medicine, quote, it always resembled a lottery more than a rational choice, end quote. And that was Alicia Bobber, who I mentioned earlier, is one of the person who wrote the book in Polish, one of the sources I mentioned. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention this. So out of the 361 students who were attending the school, 251 graduated. And for the Canadians in the room, to clarify, the bachelor's degree that most of them received there, the 227 MB-CHB, that's similar to a medical degree in Canada. It's a bachelor's degree that allows them to practice medicine as a doctor. None of my 3 family members graduated. They're not included in those 251 students, and I'll come back to that later. So to begin, let's talk about my grandpa, or Jajo Standonikewicz. He was born in a location, a part of Poland that it's now part of Ukraine, born in 1922. In 1939, at age 17, Stan jumped on his bike and rode off in the middle of the night to escape the invading German army, and he didn't see his family again until the 1960s, so almost 20 years later. He rode his bike to Romania and joined the Polish forces. And he was part of the Polish cavalry. You can see here a picture of him with his horse. He ended up being stationed in the Middle East, and in 1941 he fought in the famous siege of Tobruk. And there's a chance that this photo of him climbing a palm tree was taken in Tobruk, or near Tobruk at least. And then in 1942, he transferred to the Polish Navy, serving on destroyers, escorting convoys in the Mediterranean Sea. And he was stationed in Scotland in 1944. He was able to take military leave to finish his high school education. He didn't quite finish it, so he finished that in 1944 in Scotland. And at that point, he decided he wanted to try to pursue medicine. So he applied to the Polish School of Medicine, passed his entrance exams, and was admitted. So he has reason to be happy in this photo here. And on his first day of classes in the medical school, and this might have been physics or biology or chemistry, he was sitting in the back of the lecture hall before the professor got there, and he was kind of looking around at all the different students. And he thought to himself, well, this is a bit odd. There's a lot of women here. It was like 50% of the students were women, which is, unusual for 1944. And he noticed they were kind of, he wasn't very impressed with how they were dressed. Many of them were wearing military garb or like uniforms or kind of bland civilian clothing. So he kind of turned to his friend and then said out loud, really loudly, so the whole class could hear, he says, "There is no one here worth marrying." And one woman in particular turned around and just stared at him, like glared at him. And that woman was Danuta Niedzielska, my grandma or babcia, pictured here with her sister Miecza Niedzielska. And I'll move now to talk about their story. I'll come back to Stan in a bit. So Danuta and Miecza Niedzielska were born in 1921 and 1922 in Lvov, now part of the Ukraine, but it was part of Poland back then. And this is a photo of them and their father in 1933. And their father, he managed a hotel for Polish military officers. You can see a photo here of them standing in front of this hotel. So that sign is in Polish, but it translates to Officers' Holiday Homes. These are the Niedzielska sisters as teenagers. Probably have taken in 1988 or 1938 or 1939. Not 100% sure when it was taken. The photo is actually quite a bit ominous. It's a bit disturbing in a way because it's really the last photo that was taken of them for a few years. In fact, this hotel that they're standing in front of was actually what got their family into a huge amount of trouble when the Soviets invaded, because the Soviets, they arrested and persecuted tens of thousands of Polish military personnel. And the Soviets viewed their father, who was managing this hotel for Polish army military officers, as an accomplice, right? So He fled them before they got to Lvov, and he fled to Romania, but he didn't think they'd go after the family, so he just went alone. But they ended up going after the family. In 1940, they had a knock on their door in the middle of the night, and it was some Soviet officials, and they arrested the two sisters as well as their mother, Elzbieta, my great grandma. And they put them on a cattle train. This is in the middle of the night. Sent them off to Kazakhstan, which is near Siberia, and they were then put into slave labor on a farm. My understanding, it's not quite as bad as like the gulags, like the labor prison camps, but I'm sure it was quite traumatic. And they were there for 2 years in that farm, working. And it wasn't until 1942, so this is 2 years after 1942, that the Polish government in exile demanded the Soviets release all those Polish prisoners so they could help with the war efforts. So the Soviets released all these, political prisoners, and they were sent then to Palestine, which was occupied by the British at the time. So the two sisters and their mother Elzbieta were in Palestine, and there they joined the Polish military, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. You can see them in their uniforms here. And Danuta and Miecza were allowed to finish their high school education as well in Palestine. I think they were allowed to do it kind of like part-time, so it took them a while. It took them a couple of years, so they finished in 1944 in Palestine. There's a picture of their classroom here. And them and their classmates who graduated in 1944 from high school, 20 women in total, were then shipped to North Barwick in Scotland. So that's about a half an hour train ride from here. And North Barwick had a barracks for Polish women, military women. And so there they continued their military duties for about 6 months before being admitted to the Polish School of Medicine. Now, the story of how they got admitted to the Polish School of Medicine is actually quite interesting. If you recall, I said that there were 3 categories of students that came to the Polish School of Medicine. So half of them, had their medical studies disrupted in Poland, and then were able to continue their medical studies in Edinburgh at the Polish School of Medicine. The other 2 categories fit these other 2 categories. So, the other half of the students fit these other 2 categories, as do my family members. So the second category, this is how my Jajo Stan Donagevich joined. At some point he decided he wanted to study medicine, and so then he applied to join the school while he was in Scotland and got in. That was like his individual choice. The third category, however, is a bit different. These are students who, despite having no background in medicine or experience with medicine, were ordered by the Polish military to study medicine. And so this is the category that Danuta and Miecza fall into. So here I have a scan of the Polish School of Medicine faculty minutes that were taken in September of 1944. So you can see that the professors here are briefly discussing the new students being admitted that autumn, a whole list of new students. And here's the English translation. You don't have to read it all. I'll just point you to the relevant parts. So at the very bottom, you can kind of see it starts to say, due to the increased number of students, blah, blah, blah. So there's an increased number of students than the typical increase every year. And the reason for that is there's 2 different groups of students being admitted this year. So you have in the middle here a big list of names. This is kind of the normal students, the normal kind of like these students who had this decided just individually, hey, I want to try for the medical school. So they applied and got in. And you can see at the end of that list is Stan Donagevich is there, approved. And then you have this other group of students at the top, and it says, a letter from the Air Force Command requesting the first-year enrollment of female PSLK volunteers. That's the Polish Auxiliary Air Force volunteers. And in that list, you can see Miecza Niedzielska and Danuta Niedzielska. And you can also see Alicia Bobber there. That's that, again, name that keeps coming up because she wrote that book that I talked about at the beginning as one of the sources. So why did the Air Force Command request that this group of women be enrolled in the school? It's a very interesting story here. So apparently one of the 20 women who had come from Palestine had an uncle in Chicago who was involved in a nursing school. And they was able to get all of these women accepted into this nursing school. So these women were all excited for several weeks in North Barwick. They're like, yeah, we're going to go to the USA. We're going to start a new life for ourselves, get out of this military, go to Chicago. But then there was some sort of bureaucratic error on the part of the Polish army. It might have been intentional, but it basically prevented them from being discharged. And so they were not allowed to go. And so that kind of was that. Now, a lieutenant in the Polish army thought this was a great injustice. He thought, you have all these women who went through these like traumatic experiences in the Soviet Union, or they had all come from either labor camps or farm camps, and managed to now come to Scotland. And he saw, and then they had this great opportunity to go to Chicago, and it was taken away from them. So he thought this was a great injustice. So he wrote to the Polish School of Medicine, to the dean, asking that this group of women be admitted, and they said yes. So, I'm sure many of these women excelled at medical school. In fact, there's a 300 Faces exhibit of the medical school on the promenade, and one of those students is a very what do you call it, a very successful Polish student graduate who stayed in the UK. She's a graduate of the school and was like a doctor and a professor and all this. So, there were some great students, women students in this medical school, but you also had a lot of them who weren't really prepared to start or join medical school. Many of them had no interest in medicine, but they were kind of ordered to do it by the Polish army. And so many of them actually failed the entrance exams, but they were allowed to retake the entrance exams with like lecture notes so they could finally pass it. And they ended up starting a bit late in the semester. It was already into October when they started in 1944. And so to catch up, they had to take medical school classes on Saturdays as well. So they had for example, anatomy class, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So can you imagine one week you're in North Barwick doing military duties and so on. And then suddenly the next week you're being instructed to go to medical school and start taking anatomy classes and having to go into human corpses and open them up and all this with your bare hands. And one of the women actually, so Alicia Bobber, she writes about the very first day of anatomy class. And their first activity was to make an incision in the abdomen and separate the fatty tissue from the underlying tissue. And it went in alphabetical order. So the first sisters who had to do it were the Androska sisters, and they had the foresight to actually kind of find a pair of rubber gloves. I think they went to the janitor's closet and found some rubber gloves because they wanted to be mentally prepared to do this task first day of school. And they're about to just make that cut, and then the anatomy professor, storms in and he just starts yelling. He yells, quote, "No, this is not allowed. This is a profanation of both the remains and of science. Please remove those gloves." And then he says something that just goes to show how sexist medicine was back then. He says, "You may wear gloves later as gynecologists, but never now. Now you must learn every tissue through the direct touch of your own hands. Feel with your fingers every nerve, every small vessel, every organ." End quote. And Alicia Bobber describes the kind of broad experience as follows. She says, "For the first few weeks, I saw the whole world through a layer of fatty tissue. Its smell, both its own and the formalin, I felt in my nose, throat, and eyes so that I could neither eat nor sleep." And she then writes about how she chastised herself for complaining. She says, "Such good fortune and honor had come to me, university studies and studies that would lead to saving human health and life, and I was finding fault. What more did I want?" So it's this like interesting dynamic about feeling that they should be grateful about being in med school, but also at times having negative feelings about the whole experience, like gratitude clashing with the deeper fact that most of them didn't have any particular interest or desire in med school and just randomly ended up being ordered to do it. So, for example, my grandma, Danuta Niedzielska, had never planned to go into medicine. She had dreamed of being like a stage performer. She loved the glamour of the stage, and she was big into taking drama classes in Poland when she was a teenager. And she even continued performing in the theater, even in North Barwick in Scotland. When she got there, there's like a description of her like dressing up like a boy, like putting on these big black boots and trousers and like a white T-shirt, and then dancing in front of like a whole Scottish audience at the North Barwick local theater. Um, but I think she had to kind of give that all up when she started med school because she had to really focus on thinking, okay, I have a future in medicine. I kind of got to put the whole performer stuff aside. Um, and speaking of glamour, Danuta probably didn't like the plain clothes that she had to wear in Edinburgh. So here's a couple of photos, one of my grandparents and the other of the sisters when they were in Edinburgh. And you can see what I mean by bland civilian clothes. They only received a small military stipend with which they could buy clothes, but it was really small. They received 12 coupons per year. So a set of underwear cost 4 coupons. So they could buy 3 pairs of new underwear each year if they didn't buy any other clothes at all. I can't imagine how many coupons it would take to buy fashionable clothes, probably hundreds of years of saving coupons. So to get fashionable clothes, they would have had to actually find real money. And interestingly, the Niedzielska sisters did. It was something about like they had a pay cut from their military when they were in Palestine doing high school. And then that decision was kind of reversed later. So they were reimbursed for that pay cut they had. And so they received actually while they were in Scotland 26 pounds each from the Polish army. And then they bought these nice winter coats with that money. There's a picture of Danuta here with her nice winter coat as well as with Stan. Funnily enough, Alicia Bobber writes about how her and her classmates didn't get that much money. They were quite miffed about how the Niedzielska sisters managed to get 26 pounds each, and they somehow only got like 16 pounds each from the Polish army. I'm not totally sure what happened there. And so they were not able to afford winter coats like the Niedzielska sisters. They had to survive the Edinburgh winters in the cold. And these are just some of the funny stories, I discovered reading Alicia Bobber's book. Anyways, let's talk about the closure of the school. So in 1945, when my family were in their second year of study, a decision was made by the UK government to move towards shutting down the Polish School of Medicine. The war was over, and there were a lot of British soldiers who were in need of work or education, and this coincided with a growing anti-immigration sentiment across the UK, including in Edinburgh. Obviously, it depends on who you ask, but there are reports from Polish students of the medical school that they felt a noticeable shift in the atmosphere, where once they were welcomed fondly by the British, after the war ended, they started to feel they were no longer welcome anymore. And so this anti-immigration sentiment and the need to create new spaces for returning British soldiers to attend medical school at the University of Edinburgh were what led to the decision to close the Polish School of Medicine, this idea that it was taking up too much space. And I can't really imagine how much stress and anxiety that this uncertainty would have caused to students at the school. This promise of having this great education was now at risk of being torn away. And apparently at first, there were just rumors that the school might be closed, so there was anxiety around that. And then eventually they found out that the decision had been made to not admit any new students, but nobody knew yet when the school would close down. And this uncertainty went on for weeks. Then finally one day the students were told that the upper year students would be allowed to finish their medical studies, so that was a big relief. But unfortunately, the first 2 years of students, so the first 2 cohorts, students who started in 1944 and 1945, would not be allowed to finish because they told them it would take too long, and they had to kind of close the school down in a timely manner based on all the pressure from above to close the school. So The final class to graduated in 1849, and that would have been the third year cohort at this time. We're talking about 1945 when the decision was made to shut down the school. And the second year cohort would have been the graduating class in 1950. But that never happened because it got shut down in 1949. And you can see Stan over on the right side, Stan Donagevich. Of course, the Niedzielska sisters here are missing. For some reason, they missed their school photo day, so they don't have photos in their files, as well as one other person's missing from this collage. But this is the kind of cohort that got a bit wasn't able to finish at the Polish School of Medicine. And this no doubt caused chaos to this cohort. Alicia Bobber, she is pictured here somewhere. She's the kind of two down from the top right, and she's beside Stan Donagevich, is Alicia Bobber. She didn't think she would finish because she's like, well, we're getting kicked out, the school's closing down. So she decided to actually move back to Poland. And so that's just like one example. So, this caused a lot of chaos. But fortunately, eventually they were all told, at least the ones who were still around, were told by the dean that he was going to try to place them in other medical schools across the UK. And he was successful at doing that. But that was only for the second year cohort. They did not do that for the first year cohort. I don't really know much about what happened to the first year cohort. I just know they were disbanded, and I think that's it. So my grandma, so Babcia and Jajo and my were actually sent to the University of Leeds Medical School, and Ciecimecia was sent to the University of Birmingham Medical School. Unfortunately, however, my Babcia Danuta dropped out of the University of Leeds quite quickly because she had a baby. And back then, in those times, that was kind of the normal thing to do. When you had a baby as a woman, you just kind of give up on your career, become a housewife. You can see her at the left holding her baby with Stan behind her. And then you can see Ciecimecia also getting Niedzielska getting married here. She's actually standing there in the middle beside her husband. She also ended up dropping out of medical school in Birmingham. And they reportedly always felt like outsiders in the UK. So after Stan, out of the three of them, Stan's the only one that did complete. He completed his medical degree in the University of Leeds. And then afterwards, they felt like outsiders, so they decided to all leave the UK and move to Boston. So my grandpa continued, training in a Boston hospital. Babcia cleaned offices to help pay the bills, and they then eventually moved to Nova Scotia in Canada, where they lived for the most of their lives. So is it a happy ending? I think so. They had a pretty good life in Canada. Three of them got to hang out together in a seaside town. Danuta and Stan had 3 children, including 2 sisters who are in this. Sorry, that's from the live version of this talk. So they had 3 children and many, many grandchildren. And, I think from my perspective, thinking about my grandparents' experiences, I think the Polish School of Medicine was an amazing opportunity for those lucky enough to be a part of it, but it wasn't without its faults either. And I think studying the history of the Polish School of Medicine can offer a lot of insights that are still highly relevant today, and about the kinds of roles that medical schools can play during times of political instability. So that's my talk, and thank you so much. And please do check out the Q&A that my dad recorded for the actual live event. Some interesting questions and answers there. Thanks so much.